Okay, thank you, Mr. Varilek. For a livestock disaster program, what's the best way to provide long-term livestock disaster assistance?
Well, I think some of the things that have been done administratively have been helpful with opening up CRP acres and some of the livestock buyback programs that have been offered have been helpful. But I agree with my opponent that the best thing we can do is pass a 5-year farm bill, because it has all of the livestock indemnity program, the emergency livestock assistance program, and the other traditional programs reauthorized in that legislation. But until it passes, that doesn't matter, because right now they have not been reauthorized. So I agree with my opponent to that extent, but I disagree on the issue of how long we can wait to get this done. In 2010, we often heard Congresswoman Noem talk about the uncertainty that government imposes on our economy, and we're seeing that very directly right now with all of you who are wondering what kind of a safety net we're going to have in place. Because of that urgency, because of the drought, I think we need to be aggressive right now. We talked about this effort to force a vote on the Farm Bill, and I'm glad to hear that she's open to it again, but I don't know why we'd want to wait until we get even closer to that September 30th expiration date of the Farm Bill. I think we should support that right now. I do support it right now, because now is the time to get aggressive in resolving this uncertainty for our producers. Thank you.
Absolutely. One of the things that people don't recognize and realize all the time in South Dakota is that these livestock disaster programs are critical in South Dakota. We're one of the largest recipients of those because of the volatility that we see. The cold temperatures, the heat, the livestock indemnity program, the livestock forage program, the ELAP, all of those are very important programs to our livestock producers. The House has taken action. We saw the drought. We saw how devastating it is. We saw the fact that it was going to be tough getting feed. It was going to be tough hanging on to our herds. And that's not just an impact that's felt for 1 year. It's felt for years after that as you try to build that herd back up. I started getting my first cows and buying them after working for the farm in the summertime when I was in grade school and junior high school. I've raised herds and proud of them, proud to take them to market and make sure that you get a price so that you can have some money in your pocket to take care of your family. And that's devastating to face a drought year like we see today, and why those programs are so important. The House has taken action. We're waiting for the Senate and the President to decide that it's imperative to them and important to them to get it done.
Okay, we have more questions, and if you have some, there's still people who will take them in the form of a question, if you would, and get those turned in. And we'll start with this one, Congresswoman Noem. On this one, I think we're in the right order here. Forgive me if we're not. I'm sorry. It goes to you. You're right, Matt, sorry. This one is on the Conservation Reserve Program. It now takes 30 million acres out of production. With a growing world population, what do you believe is the best way to utilize the limited land, and do you support a working lands program, CRP?
Well, the conservation programs in general are very important, and in many cases it takes land out of production that isn't all that well suited in the first place, and it's also very important for our hunters and anyone who enjoys wildlife. And so I'm a strong supporter of investing in CRP, as well as programs that help on working lands like EQIP, for example, environmental quality incentives programs. We've got to keep on investing in those sorts of programs, because they are beneficial for a whole host of reasons to our producers, to those that care about wildlife, hunters, etc. And that's one reason that we need to make cuts in the Farm Bill, but also be careful about how we do it. There are some investments that we have to preserve. We should preserve our investments as much as we can in conservation. Same goes for rural development. Same goes for some of the energy programs in the Farm Bill that would not be funded in the House version. The Biomass Crop Assistance Program, for example, which is very important to companies trying to move on to cellulosic ethanol, would get no funding in the House version of the bill. So that's a case where I think we're cutting too deeply, and I would take a different approach and try to preserve those programs for the sake of wildlife, ethanol, and others.
Thank you, Congresswoman. On CRP, and what's the best way to utilize the limited land?
Yeah, you know, CRP has been critical to South Dakota. It's been wonderful to see land that's marginal or hard to raise a crop on be utilized to provide habitat for our game and our wildlife, and so that we can work on our hunting industry and make sure that we bring in those dollars from out-of-state hunters, and people right here can enjoy the heritage that we have with hunting as well. In the Senate bill and in the House bill, there was a reduction in CRP acres. The focus was on making sure that CRP acres were available for those marginal and highly erodible lands going forward, and that we were able to do that. Also recognizing that as we go forward in the CRP program, that it is utilized, but that when we take ground out of grass and out of production and put it back into the farming operations, that it is looked at a little bit differently. I championed a piece and a portion that was put into the House Farm Bill called the Protect Our Prairies Act. What it does is it encourages conservation of our native soil, recognizing that it's special and recognizing that it's different, and not subsidizing it with crop insurance at the same level as other ground, to make sure that while those first 4 years that land is broken up and put into production, that it is treated differently than traditional crop ground. I think it's a good balance between making sure that we have acres that are protected in conservation, but also recognizing the difference between that and traditional crop ground and giving us a transition way forward.
Okay, thank you. That on CRP, we have more land use question here. This for Congresswoman Noem. Prairie pothole region of South Dakota, known as part of the entire prairie pothole region. Tiling has become an investment for many farmers in South Dakota. Would you support any change in that, in the prairie pothole, as it relates to tiling?
Well, a lot of our farmers have taken advantage of the opportunity to maintain their ditches and drain water from their land in a safe and reliable way. The tiling that's been happening around the country, we can see that it's bringing more production onto the acres that are out there going forward. And I think that that's one of those decisions where we need to make sure that the federal government lets you have some decision-making ability here at the state level and at the county level, and that the local people who are close to those situations can help do that. A lot of times when you see the Washington, D.C. get involved, the bureaucracy makes decisions that make no sense for your farm. My goal when I go to Washington is to make sure that we leave as much control as close to you as possible. You should be making decisions for your farm, that you should be able to make sure that you're working with your neighbors to do things in a responsible manner. The prairie pothole region is special, and when I did our Protect Our Prairies Act, currently in the House bill, it's in the prairie pothole region. But also, if we expanded that nationwide, it treats everybody equitably, and it saves the taxpayers $200 million. When we've got the kind of debt that we're facing in this country, we have got to be more responsible with federal dollars and make sure they're going to where our priorities are.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Varilek. Prairie pothole tiling as investments, any changes?
Well, in fact, I agree with my opponent with the legislation she tried to put forth, and I don't recall for sure, but did it make it into the final version? But not nationwide, right?
No.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think that's a smart approach. We do need to make sure we protect some of the wetland resources. At the same time, I also think that tiling is an issue where we probably don't need a federal policy, because the impacts do change state to state, and that's an area where local input and state control probably is an important thing. And when it comes to input, I also want to just mention that my opponent has chosen not to do town halls on the Farm Bill in this recess, even though we got 5 weeks available for that local input that I was just talking about. And I can't help but think back to 2010 when she went after Stephanie Herseth-Sandlin for not having enough town halls on the issue of the day, and yet now we see that what's good for the goose isn't good for the gander, and she hasn't taken those town halls. I've tried to set a good example in my campaign and had public events from the beginning where I invite anyone who wants to come and ask questions to do so, because I think accessibility and transparency is important, and I think we should all try to do that.
Expanded answer, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, thank you, Jerry. That's absolutely not true. I've held over a dozen town halls, 2 of them just a couple of weeks ago. So I'm very accessible to everybody and holding open meetings and having these discussions with people. Listen, I am South Dakota. I live here. I go to church here and my kids attend the public schools. Whether I'm going to fairs and county fairs and parades and town celebrations, people know that they can talk to me. They know they can look in the phone book and find my number and call me at home. They know where I live because we've got a sign at the end of our driveway that says the name of our ranch. I'm one of you, and that was one of my #1 goals in making sure when I went to Washington, D.C., that you had somebody there who knew how you felt and that you could talk to. And so the fact that he makes those claims doesn't make them true, because we've been having town halls and having them all along.
Okay, we have another question here. Okay, folks, we'll move on. This is for Mr. Varilek. Actually, we'll start with Matt. Should there be caps on farm subsidies, and should it be based on income?
Yeah, this is based on the idea that we face a deficit, and we can't afford to subsidize everyone equally, and I do feel like there should be caps on farm payments. We should target our safety net to family scale farmers and ranchers, not to the biggest operators who could afford to handle more of the risk management themselves. Now, in the current environment where we've got direct payments and countercyclicals, that means potentially a hard cap on the total dollar value that you can receive. If the safety net transitions instead to primarily being based on crop insurance, then it's a matter of doing maybe what the Senate did, which is to say if your adjusted gross income is over $750,000 per year, then you pick up a slightly higher portion of the tab on your federal crop insurance. I support that because we do have a deficit situation. We can't afford to subsidize everyone, and we shouldn't be subsidizing growth, which makes it harder for the family scale farm to stay in operation. So I agree that that makes sense.
Congresswoman, should there be caps on farm subsidies and based on income?
Well, there definitely is caps in place right now, and I agree with them. And there's been some discussion throughout the Farm Bill discussion in the Senate and in the House side about moving those caps and lowering them, and I've been supportive of that. I think that we need to make sure that family farms and small farms have opportunities to receive the same benefits that larger farms do going forward as well. We have to recognize the volatility that exists in this environment as well, and what prices can do and what environment can do and economy can do when we hit those caps. You know, it reminds me a lot of the death tax and the fact that it is going to go back to 1 million at 55% here at the end of the year. You know, when you talk about the death tax and what it does to family farms and income and all of that, how it's evaluated, you have to look at what's happening on the ground and how things are valued. Currently, right now, if we allow that death tax to go back to a $1 million exemption and then taxed at 55%, 71% of the farms in South Dakota will hit that and be paying the death taxes. It's a huge number and it's devastating. It's going to keep people from being able to pass their family farms on to their kids and be able to keep the family business going.
Okay, you can, quickly, we can go back and forth on this for a moment.
Yeah, speaking of the estate tax, let me say first of all that your family never should have had to go through what they went through, and I definitely support raising the exemption level on the estate tax to a level where it would never impact family farmers and ranchers here in South Dakota. We should put it up to a level where only the people who actually know what the heck an estate is would be dealing with it. People like Donald Trump and Paris Hilton and Bill Gates. That's who should face an estate tax. Because folks, if we eliminate it even for Donald Trump, that impacts the deficit. It increases the deficit. And this actually highlights a key disagreement between my opponent and me. She wants to defend even those at the very top, the Donald Trumps, whereas I think we need people more focused on middle class, so we don't have to privatize Medicare, for example. We don't have to slash Pell Grants and all those things that actually help us grow in the future.
You know, Jerry, just let me say one thing.
Let her answer.